Gender diversity in the corporate arena is an ongoing global topic. From developed economies to emerging markets, the issue of equal representation for female executives at the highest levels of the workplace in the public and private sector continues to be at the forefront of society. So what do the numbers tell us when we study exactly how much gender representation is in corporate Nigeria, especially for a market like where we are? The Professional Women Roundtable has released a scorecard for gender representation in the boardrooms of the top 20 most capitalized companies on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And joining me to go through the report is the founder of the Professional Women Roundtable, Mrs. Ivana Osagie. Good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you first take us through how you put this report together? What was your methodology?
Good morning, Ruth. It's lovely to be with you here this morning. What we did was look at the data for the companies listed on the stock exchange. We looked at the annual reports of these companies. We looked at the data about them on the stock exchange website and also on their websites. We didn't want to look at all 160 companies on the exchange because we felt that would be too voluminous. So we decided to look at the top 20 for our first edition. And so we looked at that data. We were able to identify how many directors there were on each board and how many of those directors were female and how many were men. We also have a ranking, method. So for companies with 40% or more female representation, they have 4 stars, 30% or more, 3 stars, 10% or more, 2 stars. And for companies with less than 10%, they got 1 star. And we had one company, of course, that had no woman on its board. So that had no stars at all.
All right, thank you so much. Now, I think we have your key findings here, which we want to put up for our viewers, and hopefully you can walk us through those key findings from this PWR report. What were the key findings that you came across from the scorecard?
So what we found was that out of the 230 board seats on these companies, 48 of them were occupied by women. That's about a dismal 21%. We also found that for the 20 companies, 3 of them have female chairs. So that's about 15% of the companies by women. 30% of the top companies by market capitalization have at least 30% female representation on their boards. We know that that's comparable with the UK, where 33% of the FTSE 100 companies have a 30% female board representation. We also found that the financial services, the banks, did better than the other sectors. So in the banks, we found that 26% of the board seats were occupied by women, followed by consumer goods, where we had 20% of the board seats occupied by women. And then oil and gas, there's only one oil and gas company, interestingly, in the top 20. They had 17% of the board seats occupied by women. ICT came in with 16, and those were primarily the telecom companies, Airtel and MTN. Then we had industrial goods came in at 15%. So I think what's interesting is that in the sectors where we know that they're traditionally male-dominated sectors, they came in lower. We think that the reason why the banking sector did better than anywhere else is because of the work done by His Royal Highness Lamido, Sanusi Lamido, when he was CBN governor, which culminated in the stipulation that the banks had to have 30% of their board seats occupied by women. So those are the key findings in the report.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And I also want to, I think, when I put this up, the top 5 highest ranking performers. We've gone to this. You've taken us through the sectors. Well, we've also, we have the rankings, but we also have the top, the highest ranked performers. At least the individual. Yeah, there they are. If you could take us through that as well.
So Access Bank topped the chart. Access Bank had about 3 women out of a board of 7, and they came in with 4 stars at 42.9%, followed by Stanbic IBTC, 40%. Lafarge Cement WAPCO had 36.4%. Union Bank of Nigeria had 30.8%. Nigerian Breweries 30%. FBN Holdings 30%. So we have Access Bank with 4 stars, along with Stanbic IBTC, Lafarge and Union Bank 3 stars, Nigerian Breweries 3 stars, and FBN Holding 3 stars.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we can also take a look at the full rankings for our viewers as well. And while we're doing that, I wanted to ask, for the lower ranked companies, do you think this, I mean, how does one, get them to try to improve the amount of diversity that they have in their boardrooms?
Well, we know that what we don't measure, it's difficult to manage. So we think it's important to keep an eye on the data, because when we watch the data, we can see whether or not things are getting better. And by putting the data out there, we hope that we're starting to send messages to companies, that they want to, obviously everybody wants to get stars, but more importantly, we want companies to understand the business case for having more women on boards. Research by McKinsey shows that companies that have at least a 25% female representation on their boards had 20% higher EBIT margins than their peers. Research also by the Catalyst Inc., which is a global gender diversity advocacy agency based in the US, confirms the same finding that gender diversity leads to better, it has a positive impact on the bottom line. So it's quite important. And we think that the companies, when they understand that it's a win-win for them, when they understand what's the business case for them, that they will aspire to have more women on their boards. We think that it has to be something that is driven from the top, but also you also start working at the bottom. So we think it should be a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach to ensure that we get more women. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I don't think we have enough time. I
know, exactly. There's so much there. Okay, another thing I was going to ask, how often are we going to, I mean, this is your first edition, but how often will this, is it going to be quarterly, or is it going to even stick with annually?
This report, which looks at the boards, will be annually because the boards don't change that frequently. However, we do want to expand this to also include executive management because we're interested in having more women in leadership and governance. So when we do the executive management report, that will be, that's probably going to be more frequent than an annual report. Also, we want to look at more companies. We're interested not just in the companies listed on the stock exchange, but also private companies, because we have some large private companies out there with significant turnover, and we think we should also have a look at them so that we're able to change the landscape and ultimately affect the larger society. It's a win-win for the country and a win-win for the continent.
Excellent. And thank you for mentioning the private companies, because these, as you talked about your methodology, you went through their financials, you went through the Nigerian Stock Exchange website. So how would it work for the private companies who don't have to disclose their financials publicly, like the other, like publicly traded companies?
Well, interestingly, we find that a lot of the international investors are quite interested in diversity, gender diversity. So we know, for instance, that Goldman Sachs, a couple of months ago, came up with a guideline to say that they will not invest in companies that don't have diversity on their boards, with a particular focus on gender diversity. So private companies actually will find themselves increasingly under pressure to inculcate gender diversity on their boards. And the way that we will get data from them is by approaching them. We think that they will aspire to be seen in a positive light, and so they'll be willing to provide data. So we'll approach them to ask them for data, because that data is not in the public domain as it is for the public listed companies.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned the need for a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, but I don't know, if you had to pick one, there's an argument that as far as the bottom-up approach is concerned, at the entry level of these firms, be they public or private, you want to see more women at entry level, mid-level, and then somehow that gets reflected at the top executive, at the boardroom level. Do you agree with that approach first, or would you have to go with top-down first?
Well, interestingly, we actually don't think that there's a shortage of women at the bottom levels. We quite often find that, if anything, sometimes you have more women at the bottom levels. What happens is that a lot of time the women drop out. So you have something called the missing middle, because by the time women start to get to mid-career or mid-management, many of them drop out. Many of them choose to run their own businesses because they want to have more control over their time. It's difficult for them to manage the challenges of work and also the home front, among other factors. It's also a very aggressive space, increasingly as you get high up the career ladder. So the focus really has to be across the board. I think we should focus on all levels to ensure that we have enough women who come in and make it up into middle management, so that we have a ready pipeline who can flow up into executive management and board we don't think it's an and, we don't think it's an or, we think it's an and. So we wouldn't say, oh, focus on just the bottom and ignore the top. We think we should do it at all levels.
Okay, great. Now, I know this is focused on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. I know this is focused on the top 20 most capitalized companies, which is executive level stuff. But if I could just expand the conversation to wider society and just give you an example, and this is following through on the bottom-up approach to where we want to see more women in more positions, jobs, and so on, even in the informal sector. In 5 years of ride-hailing being in Lagos, I've only seen maybe 2 female drivers. Informal, I've only seen, I think, only 1 downfall bus driver that was female. I've never seen a female vulcanizer in my life, right? So if we're to expand this conversation and say, okay, if we see more women across the board in all these positions, will that somehow get us where we need to go?
I mean, I think certainly we want to see that women are able to break through across the society. So we're not just talking about in the corporate space, also in the informal sector. We want to see that women are able to contribute the value that they have, that they can bring to the table. We want to see more inclusive societies, generally speaking. We know that the IMF tells us that the countries do more, they do better, they're more prosperous when we have women more involved in the economy. So yes, we definitely want to see this happen across the board. It's not just in the corporate space. We want to see that. That's why it's actually quite important to have more senior women out there, because we have younger women in schools, we have younger women lower down who can see women like themselves occupying top spaces and creating change and bringing value to the table. It means that they have role models that they can aspire to be like. So it's very important that we take this across all spheres of society. When we have men and women more involved in governance and leadership, we will find that things will work a lot better. You have diversity of opinions. Women and men have different viewpoints, so it's important to have both sitting at the table. You don't go into a boxing ring with one arm tied behind your back. You're not likely to do very well. So it's important to have both gender involved all the way across.
Thank you for that. Okay, so you mentioned role models, right? The sector report, you've taken us through the sector report, looking at how many women are at board level in ICT, banking, consumer goods, and so on. We've only got a couple of minutes, but how important is it to get more young girls in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math? How about pushing that as well, so we have a larger flow, so we can, there's the sector report, so we can fill up more of these positions?
I think it's particularly important now because we know that the world of work is changing. As we move forward, we know that technology is going to play an increasingly significant role in the way that we live and work. And so it's very important that we have more women involved in STEM, because otherwise what will happen is that the women become more disenfranchised as they lose their jobs. The jobs that are going to go are the jobs that are not technology enabled. So we need more women in technology so that the women also contribute value to society. So yes, it's very important for STEM to ensure that we encourage young girls to aspire to become engineers, to work in the oil and gas sector, to become pilots, and to do all of those great things that help us to live better lives.
Only got about 20 seconds for you to answer this. Their parents, if a parent was an art student and they're trying to get their child in STEM, how important is it for a parent that has no interest in that field to push their student? 20 seconds if you can.
I think that it's important to let children do what they want to do, but more importantly, they must have role models, so they must be exposed to people other than the parents to see what is possible. If a parent is an art person, that's fine. If the child is interested in science, then expose them to role models that they can see, a woman, for instance, a woman engineer. So that's why career counseling is very important. And we have people from organizations who go into schools to talk to the young girls to ensure that they can see what's possible.
Fantastic. The founder of the Professional Women Network, Professional Women Roundtable, Ivana Osagie, thank you so much for taking us through the report. We appreciate your time.